So I'm not sure how the counselors feel, but would it be, I think it might be easier if the counselors turned off their video, their camera, just so that we can have that interactive workshop today with the members of the public for tonight. Oh, thank you.
Hi, Sarah. It's the dinosaur here. How do I do that?
Oh, so on your bottom left corner, there's a mute button and a stop video button.
Yep.
You see, yeah, if you click the stop video button, it should turn your camera off.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
No problem.
Is everyone signed in that registered, Sarah?
No,
Okay.
I only
This
have,
is weird not having you right beside me.
right. I think it's the first meeting where we're in our own.
Yeah, it's the first meeting I've done actually remotely.
No, I only have 3 out of the 11 that were registered, so
Okay.
we'll still start in a minute and keep letting people in as they enter.
It may be that some people are unfamiliar with using Zoom, so maybe give them a bit more time, and I think it should show.
Yes. Hopefully,
Yeah, I will say, Sarah, that there was very short notice. A lot of folks didn't realize this was happening tonight, so.
yes, we
Well,
have another
the-
one on February 4th. Yeah, which will be the exact same meeting
Yes.
tonight. So that has been advertised, and there are more registrations then, but we did want to fit another one in, even if we are rushing it, so that we do provide at least 2 meetings. There will be a second
Pardon me?
round of consultations as well. Veronica?
They asked for everybody to turn off their videos so you
No,
can see you.
just the counselors.
Oh, just the counselors, you don't have to
off
turn it
your
off.
video.
Oh, no,
Why?
I don't know.
Jim, you
That's
don't- you
what
don't
she
have-
asked.
Oh,
Didn't you hear it?
no.
Jim,
No,
Jim?
that was
Yes.
just for the counselors.
you don't have to turn it
Oh.
off. I was just asking
Okay.
the members of the council to turn it off so that we don't hear you. Veronica?
Yes, I'm here. Yep.
Okay, perfect. Do you want to turn on your camera or do you prefer to have it off?
I'll turn it off. My kids are in the background, so. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. So maybe we'll start. Right, so we don't delay this any further. I'll keep letting anyone that joins, but the mayor's just gonna quickly start the meeting.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone who's here to the Ward Boundary Review Public Input Meeting of, what's the date today? January 26th. And just want to let everyone know that we have a second meeting that's available on February 4th. And council will be holding comments tonight because we will be able to debate it and make comments when we have our final presentation by the consultants on our February 16th meeting. That's the Tuesday after the what's that, Family Day holiday. That's the one. And just an announcement, although also please be advised that although this meeting is not being live streamed, it is being recorded. Once the meeting is over, the clerk will be reaching out to all the participants tonight to receive consent to post the recording publicly. And without any further ado, we'll get the meeting started.
Thank you, Mayor. So Thank you all for your attendance tonight. As the mayor stated, this is the first of the 2 meetings that we have planned for the first round of the public consultations. Again, the second one is February 4th, and the consultants will be coming to council for a report on February 16th with all the feedbacks that we will be receiving tonight. So I just want to introduce, it will be an interactive workshop tonight, and it will be led by our consultants that are currently undertaking this ward boundary and council structure review. So I would like to introduce John Matheson and Olivia LaHaye from Strategy Corp. So I'll
Hi, everyone.
on over to John.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and welcome to all the members of the public who came tonight, and also to all the members of council. And thank you very much for your support of the process by being here tonight. Your support of the process is really important because public engagement is a critical part of a review of this nature. So what I'll just do is share my screen. As Sarah said, this is going to be very much not a normal format for a meeting, but an interactive workshop. And I'll give you an idea of what we're going to do, and then we can dive right in. But I assure you there's going to be lots of opportunity for participation throughout it, because as much as it's my responsibility tonight to help share information about the process with you. What I'm really hoping to do, and my colleague Olivia, what we're really hoping to do is find out what you think, because that will help inform the process and get to the best results at the end. So I'm going to take you through some of just a quick background about of the rationale behind the council structure and ward boundary review and what the process is going to look like. We'll have a brief introduction to the concept of effective representation, which is the most important principle that is the guide for ward boundary reviews in the province of Ontario. Then we'll take a look at the current wards and see what we've got. And throughout it, I'll be asking you a series of questions. And I should just say, a lot of the content you'll see here is available to you in other forms. Some of it is slightly modified for workshop purposes, but available in the online videos. And you'll find that the questions that I'll be asking are going to mostly mimic the ones that we're asking in the online survey. That wasn't because I couldn't be bothered making up new ones. It's because the questions in the online survey are the most important to help inform the information that we need to be collecting. And so I would say that while we're really thrilled that you're here, I don't want you to think that there's like a whole secret behind the velvet rope set of content here. Anybody who's watching this at home or on video, once it's been posted, or who might be seeing it later, should be aware that folks who are communicating with us through other means have all the same opportunities to communicate with us. And so the same questions are being asked. The other thing I should say is that while I have a bunch of questions to ask you, the last question at the end is there anything else that's on your mind that you want to share? So I really want to emphasize that I believe you'll find that there's lots of different opportunity to say whatever it is that's on your mind. But if whatever it is that's on your mind hasn't fit in one of the questions in a way that you felt appropriate to share it, then there'll certainly be the opportunity at the end for a sort of the final catch-all question. So hopefully we'll have a very comfortable environment for you to be able to share whatever it is that you have that's of relevance to this process. So what I'll do is I'll kind of dive right in with some of the basics. I'll try and get through this part fairly quickly. This is really all about your council, and local government, critically important to the lives we lead on a daily basis. The town of Grimsby provides important services to residents, and you know very well what they are. And what you'll find is I may not read every word at you that's on the page, because I know you can read more quickly than I can talk. But there's a couple of points I want to emphasize, just so that we're all working from a common knowledge base. Firstly, and you're sort of privileged to have many of them with you in the meeting tonight, Grimsby is led by an elected council that consists of a mayor and 8 councillors. And as you probably know, they're elected every 4 years now. Now the mayor is elected at large, meaning everybody who's eligible to vote gets to cast a vote in their election. And then there are 4 wards, and each ward elects 2 councillors. So that's the current structure that we have now. Now, Grimsby also has representation at Niagara Regional Council by the mayor and by 1 regional councillor who's elected at large. But Grimsby's representation on Niagara Regional Council is not part of this review. So that's not something that we've been tasked to take a look at. So Grimsby is reviewing its council structure and ward boundaries. So the review of the council structure, that requires us to focus on how many councillors they are and how they will be elected. And we'll get into the details of that in a minute. The review of the ward boundaries focuses on ensuring that ward boundaries continue to provide a system of effective and equitable representation for all residents. And effective representation, there's a whole section we'll have on that. So that's kind of the basic structure of the review. Now, the review is supposed to cover options to accommodate projected growth to cover the next 10 years, which is the period of the next 3 municipal elections. So we're supposed to forecast not just current population, but also the growth in the population out to a period of 2030 to make sure that it's appropriate from an effective representation point of view. And as others have already suggested, this is going to be guided by feedback and input from Grimsby's communities and residents, and through 2 rounds of public consultation and the online survey. So the first report that you heard referred to in February, that we're making in mid-February, that's going to be our preliminary findings to council. And then there'll be a whole second round after that, building on that. And the process is expected to sort of wind up in June. But the urgency in all this is the next election is going to be held in October of 2022. So it's really valuable to your community that you are here participating in this, because this review will literally set the structure of the council that you'll be voting in that election, as well as the shape and number. So it's a terrific thing that you're here to be part of that. And I just want to welcome a couple of our guests who've joined in the last couple of minutes. You haven't missed much at all. I'm John Matheson. I'm the consultant who's going to be leading the workshop today. As you'll hear, this is an interactive session. I'll be asking you a number of questions throughout that will give you the opportunity to participate. This initial presentation is just a bit of a briefing, but that'll roll in soon enough to a kind of a back and forth where you'll be able to give feedback on things. And then at the end, if there's something that you haven't been able to cover, we're more than happy to accommodate listening to any other things that you may want to say that you didn't feel were covered by those questions. But I'll just keep rolling along. I guarantee you haven't missed too much. It's terrific that you're here. I'll just jump on to the next slide. Some might just start off with the question, why conduct this review? It's a great question. The town of Grimsby hasn't had an independent review and big consultation around its ward boundaries since 1993, which is getting on for 27 years now. And ward boundaries often have their roots in history, and they reflect where the population lived and how big it was at the time the boundaries were first drawn. But communities are always growing and evolving, and as the population grows, it's really common that they don't grow at the same rate. Sometimes you get the growth focused in one area, and then that can throw the population of the wards out of balance. And so the objective of the review is to ensure that the ward boundaries and structure and provide a system of effective representation for all residents. So that's why it's something that has to be done every now and again to manage the effective growth on the fairness and effectiveness of the overall system. So I began to describe some of the process. Here's a little bit more detail on it. But as you see, it's the key point here is that it's a back and forth iterative process, different opportunities for council to be involved and stakeholders and the public. And I really want to encourage you to stay involved in this through the Let's Talk Grimsby project site. Any of the materials that we post will be available there. They'll both the survey that's currently open and the one that we'll be doing in the second phase will be driven through that. It's a very, very powerful tool that your community has for public consultation, and we'll be continuing to make good use of it throughout the process. And so just there's, you know, you heard it from me, but I know it'd be very important to the council and the mayor. Getting involved, it's so valuable to hear the opinions of the public. And so we're really going to encourage everybody to really feel very welcome to stay involved throughout the process.
John, did we?
Me.
John, I think you were muted.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think you muted me. That's okay.
Sorry.
That's my spouse has wanted to be able to have that function installed for quite some time, so she may give you a call afterwards. For those who just arrived, I've really just provided a bit of a background on the process, and actually you needn't feel that you missed anything, because if you were to go look at the first video on the web, you'd hear pretty much everything that I just said. So we're just starting to get into the important part. The only thing, again, that the three folks who've joined since the last time I gave this update is this is an interactive workshop, so don't worry, I'm not going to be talking at you all evening. I'll be just finishing off some of this background briefing material, and then it'll be interactive, and I'll be asking questions, and hopefully you'll be giving me answers, and you'll see how we do that in a minute. And at the end, there'll be a chance to say anything that you haven't felt you've had a chance to say. So please don't think that you'll be in any way constrained by the course of the process. Just a little bit of background on what the provincial rules are. It's good to know if you're playing a game, good to know what the rules are. It's absolutely within the jurisdiction of a municipality to review and set the size of its council. Basically, the main rule there is that your council must have a minimum of 5 members, including the mayor. So you cannot go below 5. You can go larger if you wish. The head of council must be elected at large, so every eligible voter. And there's 3 options by which councillors can be elected, typically by ward. Either they can also be elected at large, or they can be elected by a combination of both by ward and at large. That's often used to help select a deputy mayor. So sometimes one councillor will be elected at large, but the question of how the deputy mayor can be selected actually isn't part of this review. It wasn't included in the terms of reference. So it's fair to say that while there's 3 methods of electing councillors, the 2 that are probably the most relevant to us in this review are by ward or at large, but it would be possible to do a combination of both. First question that we'll be coming to then, and is that you might have for me is, well, okay, I've already shared that there's 8 councillors plus a mayor here, and as we've already discussed, for those who weren't here, or by way of refresher, it's 4 wards and 2 councillors per ward. So that's the structure you have. How does that compare to other municipalities and other communities? So for context, we've put up this chart that shows the councils of 30 other Ontario municipalities that fall between about 21,000 and 51,000. And the reason we picked that range is because Grimsby's current estimated population is about 30,000, and of course that's slated to grow. And so as you can see, of the 30 in this sample, 9 have councils of 9 members, like Grimsby. 12 have councils of 7 members, and that's a common size. And as you can see, the remaining 9 range all the way from 5 all the way up to 16, and they're all 1s and 2s. So there's 1 at 5 and 2 at 8 and 2 at 11, for example, but that's how you reach that chart. So basically you could say of the peer municipalities in terms of size, it's very common for councils to have either 9 or 7 members, and the other sizes are somewhat rarer. So the first question that I had for participants is, and of course, there's no right answer to any of this, what are your thoughts on the current size of council? Is it the right size? Is it something that you'd like to recommend changing? And I'll introduce you to my friend, the virtual yellow sticky, which I'm going to use to take your comments. And needless to say, I can create as many yellow stickies as you can have opinions. So I'm more than happy to take your opinions and just make sure that we have them and keep track of them as they go. So does anyone want to help me out by making an initial comment on size of council before we move on to other topics?
Jim Howden, can you hear me?
Please, go ahead.
I'm happy with the current size of 8.
You're happy? I just want to make sure I heard that right.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Because I think the risk of going to a lower number is that it's easier for a group of special interest or for special interest groups to pack the slate. So you don't get the diversity of views and opinions with a smaller council.
Okay. And as you can see, this is the way I take the notes.
Okay.
I won't attribute them to anybody, but I would view it as a favor if either because I can't hear you, because sometimes the connection isn't great, or if you think I'm not capturing what you intended to say or what you did say, it's actually a favor if you tell me. I won't take it as an insult, because the only thing I'm looking to do is have an accurate sense of the kinds of opinions that we heard. It's if I'm not getting it right, I'm not happy either. So so just for anybody else, if as we go along through the evening. But I hear you loud and clear, happy with 8, and the problem would be if it was packed, we'd lose the range of inputs.
Mr. Matheson?
John,
Hello?
please just call me John.
Oh, John, it's Rob Hatton here. I have a really bad hair day, so that's why I'm video muted.
Okay.
I share Jim Howden's comments with regard to how things could be skewed. I'm generally in favor of the 7+1 model, but I would also be open to, and again, this is a little bit of a rabbit hole, but I'm also in favor of a deputy mayor either as its own position or a deputy mayor, which would be, like you said, on that third model, where it would be, people would stand for council and they could put also their name forward to be selected at large. And again, I don't want to put out too many options, but I'm generally in favor of 7+1 and potentially 7+2, with deputy mayor being a new position, which could also, and again, rabbit hole here, be also our regional councillor, because I think one of the gaps we have is the integration of our regional representation at a fulsome level to our people, not necessarily council to council, but council to people. And I think that might help solve that issue.
Okay. And just to be clear, that's 7 by ward, 1 by at large, and then
no, it'd be 6. It'd be so generally 7 total.
Okay.
So it'd be 6 wards.
Okay.
6 wards, 1 rep per ward, and then either a mayor on top of it and or a deputy mayor. But I know that we get into other governance and issues with municipal affairs in the region. But if there's a way to consider that, that might help solve another problem.
Thank you. Actually, any thoughts, just to ask a follow-up question, any size is permissible. Some are of the view that it's handy to have an odd number just so that you don't wind up getting ties.
That was my thought. I'd like to see the tiebreaker vote, so like an even number with the mayor as the guy that could go, right, take us over for breaking a tie. That there's something to be said for that, I think.
But look, it's worth saying though that people obviously make it work. There's one here at 6, there's one here at 8, there's one here at 10. So I certainly couldn't tell you that it's forbidden or anything, but So I hear some support for tiebreaker of having an uneven number, whatever that might be.
Yeah, I'd like to build on Rob's suggestion and perhaps consider one counselor per ward. So that would be 4 and 2 at large. Whether one of those at large is a deputy mayor or not is something we could hash out, certainly. But there's your 6 plus 1 is 7. And so with 1 per ward, we could even look at remuneration a little higher for the folks that are there rather than splitting the money 8 ways. Now you're splitting it 6 ways. So you might end up with folks a little more committed to the cause. But you know, we've all seen what happens with votes in Grimsby lately, and we need a tiebreaker, and we need to revisit the mayor's role, I think, as well in some of this. I think he's had his hands tied a little bit.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, John.
Yep.
2 questions. One, would this chart look any different if it was, say, 30, 40, and 50,000 people?
Really, these sizes are pretty common. Like I think you find 7 and 9 are the 2 most common. So it wouldn't look too different. There's not a lot that are at 5.
Okay. The other one is, the other question I have is, are there any studies done on which is more effective? Like which towns or municipalities have done better than the others, and what size they are?
The quick answer is no. Not ones that you'd go to the bank on, because so much of it has to do with you know, the people in the position, that the structure isn't really something that would be determinative of it, I don't think.
Okay.
You know, there's certainly people who have opinions, but I wouldn't dignify them with the term studies.
Okay.
Any other thoughts on size?
So we have people raised hands. I'll just
Okay, thanks. Go
see
ahead.
first. Stacy McNeil,
Thanks.
you're muted.
I'm unmuting myself now. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. Hello, Mr. Matheson and folks. The town of Grimsby has worked extremely well with 4 wards and with 2 members per ward since the 1970s. Our problem now is that we have a lot of population increasing within Ward 4 in particular, but not to say that the whole town doesn't need to be realigned within the wards. 2 councillors per ward seems to be a good thing, and especially if you're within your ward, you have an opportunity. You may have a councillor who's 2 councillors, 1 councillor who's representing you doesn't want to talk to you. And so how do you make your views known? So you need to have at least another person so you have an opportunity to express your point of view. The town of Grimsby has done all kinds of experiments without really looking at the consequences. We've got a committee of the whole system here where people didn't even think about what was going to be the result of it. And what's happening now is we have far less community representation within the committee of the whole system than we ever had. And I'm hearing people saying, geez, what we need is fewer councillors. Hell no, hell no. What we need to do now is we need to preserve what we have here in town, give the people an opportunity to speak at the election. And if they need a wholesale change, that's fine. But it's absolutely true that before the next election, we have to rejig the boundaries so that people are adequately represented. We can't have, 1,000 more in one ward and 2,000 fewer in another ward. Like, it's just, that's a ridiculous and undemocratic way to do it. So what we need to do is we need to do the least harm. And the least harm results in taking what we have and rejigging it and giving the people an opportunity to speak at the next election to say, this is what we need to do, rather than having councillors yakking on our behalf and thinking that they know what they're doing. And basically, let's do the least amount of harm and let's not do the most amount of damage. That's my opinion.
Okay. Thanks for that. I think Veronica, you had your hand up too.
Veronica, you might be muted.
Mute me. Sorry. Okay, I was trying to take it off so I could get onto video too, but I don't quite see how I can do that. Okay, anyhow, my personal view is that, first of all, nothing is set in stone for me. I still need to hear a lot of these, this dialogue with other residents. I think it's great. Right now, I would prefer more wards with one representative. I feel right now we have, what I'm experiencing is that sometimes we don't even have any representation in our ward. And so you might message a counselor and never hear back. But if we have one representative, they can't deflect and pass the buck to somebody else who's actually doing the callbacks. So I would prefer more wards, definitely more power with more people. I don't want less and more power in a few hands, just to get more representation.
Did you have a number in mind?
I'm okay where we are presently. I agree that we need a tiebreaker for right now. Again, this is kind of early stages of what I'm thinking, but that's kind of where I stand right now.
Perfect. And just so for everyone's benefit, that's where the entire review is. This is leading input about how you feel right now. You know, just based on the current state. So there's lots of time to further develop thinking on this. So that's all very welcome input. And just from a point of view of process so far, I think the number is perfect to be able to just sort of chime in as you have been. Please, if I'm missing you, feel free to wave your hand furiously or whatever. I react well to that. And the most important thing to me is that we just keep it moving smoothly. So, but I think it's going well so far, and I hope you feel the same. Any other comments on this one? There's lots of other good questions, but I don't want premature.
Rob, if I can just have a rejoinder, since Stacy opened up a little bit of a thing here, maybe it's going to come up later. But on your second sticky, it'd be 6 plus 2, I think, is just to clarify that point on if we were to have a deputy mayor. But I think Stacy brought up a good point. I think what is changed by going to the committee of the whole structure is we have now exempted the public from having any meaningful delegations with council. Imagine our poor councilors who, you know, a delegation's allowed 10 minutes. You are now covering off 5 areas of expertise: planning, finance, parks and rec and all that other stuff. And 5 people come forward a night to cover off 5 things. I mean, our poor counselors are already overworked as is these long meetings. So I think we really have to go back to the committee structure. I think the benefit of that is it provides expertise by a few counselors who can sink their teeth into an issue, as well as hear as many public delegations as necessary. And by going to the committee of the whole structure, what has happened is you have staff who are the only areas of expertise giving counsel or guidance to our council on things that could be very controversial. And I think from that standpoint, if we were, let's say, to go 6 and 2 or 6 and 1 as a number, but we increase the number of people on our lay committees, even including on finance, where we would have people on finance, you know, CAs and other people, that could give a good counterbalance to staff and other things like that. You know, we either hire more consultants to get, you know, work or expert reports, or we increase our staff. The third option is we have more people who live here with areas of expertise and get their knowledge and expertise for virtually free, as well as their public commitment to what is best for the town and not necessarily what is prescriptive because that's the flavor of the day going through bureaucracy. So as I said, this is for me probably the most hot button issue. And again, we saw it on as an example with Nick Andrechuk, God rest his soul. Nick is mayor, he served on committee of adjustment, all that other stuff. Where do you get a body of knowledge of 40 years as mayor, council on planning? And Nick served almost to his last dying death. And there was something we got for free and the town was better for it. So I think, to build on Stacy's point, for me, that is a gift that we are not taking advantage of. And we flipped it around by going to the committee of the whole, and our counselors don't get to hear the voice of the community in a meaningful way.
Thank you for that. Any other comments on this? Because I'm looking at the clock and I think it may be prudent to move on unless anybody has something that hasn't been said.
Some awesome ideas there, Rob. It's Dave Rollison here, longtime resident of the area. Really agree with what Mr. McNeil said as well. And more specifically, if population does increase to the point where, we could have a situation much smaller, but like they do in the States, where the electoral colleges are weighed, the weight is not right. You need an appropriate number of people per councillor, whether that's 1 per ward or 2 per ward, in whether it be a 6-ward town or a 4-ward town. You definitely need the proper representation and the aspect of having a citizens contributory group. We've got so much talent in this town. And I believe council, just looking at a lot of the council members there that we have right now, we need some overseeing people that know what the heck they're doing, to be quite frank. And that would help immensely, in my opinion.
I'm just going to move on to the next slide, but please, there'll be an opportunity to make further comments at the end. So I'm not going to end anything. I'm just keen to make sure that we get through this evenly. And I'm just going to grab some stickies because I seem to have forgotten to put some on this next one. The next just sort of relates to one of the second areas of the review, which is the ward or at-large or combination of at-large. And you'll see there it sets out what some of the advantages can be. And this gets at maybe one of the questions that was asked, if there's any kind of academic research on size or form of election that you can rely on. And where we've put some of the advantages of what it could be, or what some of the advantages of an at-large system can be, it's just that. It's just differing opinions within the system. I would really strongly emphasize what's in bold there, which is there is no right or wrong answer about this. It's what you think is going to work best for your community, given all the factors, which is why your input's so important. So what you'll see is, of the same 30 Ontario municipalities between 21 and 51, 18 use a ward system. So it's by far and away the most common, but 10 use an at-large system. So it's certainly frequently used as well. And 2 of them use a combination of wards and at-large. So that's where I was getting at, that the most common by far are ward and at-large, but combination is used. So I don't propose to read the advantages of the 2 systems at you, because as I said, you've probably read them faster than I've been able to talk. So does anybody have any comments that we haven't already heard? Because I can sort some of the ones from the previous page that suggested at large or ward, but does anybody have anything that hasn't been said about preferences on wards versus at large?
John, it'll be real quick. I think the ward system, because of the expense involved, encourages more people to participate. I'm kind of ambivalent on how we do it. But I think one of the things, and again, this is outside the scope, if we are to encourage more people to participate in the democratic process, and campaigns are expensive, we have to talk to municipal affairs and the Department of Finance about making campaign expenses deductible, so it's affordable for people to participate, because for every 2 that win, there's probably 4 that lose, and they put a lot of money into it. So again, outside the scope, but it's something if the goal is to encourage more people to participate, it's a tough nut to swallow. Bad enough for the counselors who did win and spent, $5,000 to $15,000, but it's even tougher when you've spent 15 and got nothing for it. And we need to figure out how we encourage that, probably through the tax system.
Other comments on?
Veronica has her hand up, so.
Okay, Veronica.
I was just curious as to how you could do the combination of the wards at large the ward system and the at-large system. How does that work?
Like there's one place, for example, which has a population very similar to yours, the town of Tecumseh. It's you might think of it as the Mississauga of Windsor. It's down in Essex County, and they have a council, a total number of 7, including the mayor. They have five councillors elected by ward, and they have 1 councillor who is elected at large. They use that position for determining the deputy mayor. So you designate yourself as either running in a ward or running at large, and it's as simple as that. Now, I believe there are other examples, although they're very rare, and they're typically in, township settings that aren't much like yours, where you might have like a second at-large councillor. And what people say the benefit of it is it changes the basis on which elections are happening, and so maybe it sort of changes the basis of effective representation by it might tend to be a second representative getting elected from one of the more populous areas without actually sticking them into a specific ward. So they have to think about the whole community, but it's sometimes viewed as a balancing technique. But as you see from the numbers, it's not very common.
So sorry, I'll just give where my thinking is right now. Even though the ward system seems to be more accepted, the thing that I'm thinking about is, say you have 10 amazing candidates, but they're all in one ward. And then you have all these other wards that have less than acceptable candidates. You could have a whole council full of people that really shouldn't be there, where all the quality candidates are possibly in one ward. So that's kind of why I almost like the at-large. And another thing is that with Grimsby, we're supposed to be making decisions based on people that live on the mountain, people that live at the lake. We're making decisions for everybody in Grimsby. So it shouldn't be a matter of, well, I live at the lake, so I'm going to push for what's best for me. It should be what's best for everyone. So I almost am leaning more towards the at-large system for that reason.
Mr. McNeil?
Again, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. I'm going to build a little bit on what Rob Hatton was saying. And it seems to me that at election time, people have, and especially if they're new folks, they have very little opportunity to get their name and their face known. For them to run and knock on every door in town is a huge, huge request of people, and to make themselves known throughout the town is extremely difficult. And again, my belief is that during the 1970s, Grimsby was at large up until that point, and they started realizing that the expense and that not being able to get people who could afford to run all the way across town. Just let's use an example of brochures. If you're going to knock at 1,000 doors versus 12,000 doors, there's a huge difference in expense, and that's going to knock out a lot of good people. Within the ward system, for example, you don't necessarily have to reside within a ward to be elected from that ward. There's a lot of truth in that. And the other side of it as well is some folks have businesses in a different ward and choose to run saying, listen, I've got a business in this ward. I've got interest in this ward, and that's why I'm going to be able to represent you well as your ward representative counselor instead of any other person. So what I'm saying is that if it ain't broke this way, let's not, again, we can definitely make this an issue for the next election and say, listen, we really want to have the complete input from the town. And this is what we choose. We can put it into a referendum. We can do a whole bunch of things rather than doing much more than just sticking with what we have, rejigging to make it fair for everybody within the community so that there aren't huge pockets that are overrepresented and other pockets that are underrepresented. I think that at large isn't going to necessarily work for us anymore. We're past that, unfortunately, and we're going to have to find a new way. And whether we have 6 or whether we have 4 or whatever, any major changes need to be talked to to the entire community, and the entire community makes that change. Thanks.
Hi, John.
Hi.
Hey, thanks for doing this. Thanks for giving me the chance to ask a question. Just to speak to Mr. McNeil's point earlier, do you have a cost comparison for like what it would cost for a candidate to run in an at-large system versus a ward system at all?
I don't, but here's one way you could think of it, which is if, now this is going to be population as opposed to households, so it won't be right, but if you look at the populations per ward, you can see it's considerably different to have, signage or pamphlets or such available for, for this many households as opposed to the entirety of it. So, if you're talking 12,000 households or something like that, 10,000 households, it's a bigger job. So, it could be like a factor of 3 or 4. I've run lots of campaigns, so the funny thing is it's probably the shoe leather and the time more than it's the money, because of the miracle of it's almost as cheap to print 3,000 pamphlets as it is to print 4,000 as it is to print, like, the paper is cheap and it's the setup that's expensive. So it's I think it's the time and it's the authenticity of the connection, but there's some money there for sure. And signs are more expensive. So but it'd be more money for sure. One thing we could do to get that number for you is just take a look at what they were spending on the regional councillor position. So I can undertake to dig that up and have that for the next public meeting, and you'll see it be posted up through our materials. So I better shoot back up to where. It's a good question. So we got Veronica first, and then Henry.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, after hearing some of those last comments, for myself, I just really want to make sure that we have the best possible candidate. So I would agree that if the ward system is more of a hindrance as far as finances for the newbies that need to get their name out there, then maybe the ward system is fine. But with that, it would have to be contingent that people could run outside their wards still, just to make sure that we don't have wards that are, super concentrated and a lot weaker pool of candidates in other wards.
And that is the case. People are not limited to.
John?
Yes, go ahead.
Is there a way to eliminate the first past to post concept that if it's a ward system, you can't win with 23% of the vote?
Well, they were moving towards the the ranked ballot as an option under the provincial election, and then they suspended that. So that would have been a different way. But we shouldn't get into that because the province has suspended that as an option, and otherwise the rules are set by the province. So you should assume for the purposes of this that while there's lots of really fun conversations you could have about this over a coffee about how to improve it, there's nothing that Grimsby can do under its own power that wouldn't have to be enabled by provincial change.
Okay, fair enough. Unfortunately, I have to drop off now. I have another meeting.
Oh, well.
So good luck.
I'll give you a note to excuse you, but you know, we can give you a detention for the next meeting next week. So.
Okay, yes. Thank
You'll
you.
You'll be welcome back. Henry, you are next.
I have another question. I don't know a lot about this stuff, so I have more questions than I have comments or opinions.
That's why we're here.
I think, does it make a difference? Because I've seen this where I read something here and there. Does it matter whether it's by population or by eligible voter?
Okay. So we'll get to that in a minute. And the quick answer is the courts have considered this and it's by population. So we calculate the wards by population, not by eligible voters. And the reason for that's kind of a nice one. It's that everybody deserves representation. And so whether you're a 2-year-old or a 6-year-old, or whether you're a voter or not. Where it gets very interesting actually is in a place like a cottage country where you have a very low permanent population and you have an enormous seasonal population, then you calculate it by the seasonal, like all-in population, not just the permanent. Similarly, it also gets really interesting in university communities. So there was a very interesting case a few years ago where the Queen's University Student Union challenged the ward boundary review that was done basically not taking into account all the students. And if you've ever gotten to know Kingston at all, and it's a similar issue that happens in Hamilton and in other places that have large concentrated student ghettos, that case went to the Ontario Municipal Board and then beyond. And it further reaffirmed the proposition that we count total population.
Population. Oh, great. I didn't know that. Thank you.
No, it's a great question. Any other questions on this? And we can keep moving on because we'll get into some more of the work. You sort of saw the slides ahead, so we get into some other interesting stuff. Maybe I'll move on. The last question here is just right now you've got 2 per ward. It's most common to have 1 per ward. It's not impossible to have 3 per ward. So does anybody have any? We've heard one view already, which I made note of on the first slide about people liking the 2 per, because it ensures that if you don't have a good relationship with someone, you've got a second voice. Any other thoughts on the effectiveness of 1 per ward or 2 per ward or 3 per ward, or any preferences that you might have in that? Rob, I see your hand.
Yeah, just to reiterate, the 1 per ward, I think, provides clarity around who is going to represent you, and it doesn't stop other people from talking to other councillors if they don't represent their view. And I think the broader, the more wards and exclusivity around who represents that ward just gives tighter context to it. It also allows familiarity, as you've already pointed out, but I think moreover the engagement of the councillor with the issues can be just much deeper as far as that concerned, and you don't have the redundancy of 2 councillors digging down on the same issue. I think there's an efficiency to knowing of 1 councillor knowing their ward intimately. And again, hence my view of 1 per ward and more wards.
Okay. Any other comments on 1 or 2 or 3 or more per ward? I'm going to keep moving because we've got a lot to get through here. You've probably figured out that if you say it, I'm going to write it down, whether it's technically the subject matter of the slide anyway. So you don't have to be threatened by my moving on. So look, here's a bit of a background on the effective representation test. I just want everybody to understand this because this is the basis on which we have to do our judgments about what is good and what is effective. And given to us first by the Supreme Court of Canada in a case from the 80s called the Carter decision, but it's been interpreted and reinterpreted and reinterpreted in OMB and LPAT cases, right up to the current day. There are 5 basic principles. You see them set out here, and together they make up the effective representation test, but I'm not going to read them at you because I got a slide on each one. The first is something that a couple of you have already mentioned, so congratulations. There could be a future for you on the Supreme Court of Canada. This idea that votes should be more or less equal in weight, and so therefore wards should be designed with relatively equal populations. Now, I just emphasize that the courts recognize that some variation is inevitable, and because people are always coming and going and moving around, it's impossible to keep them perfectly equal. And similarly, some may also be desirable, because in places that have, and we'll talk about this more, that have unique characteristics, sometimes it's desirable to let one be a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller in order to make it all work. Now you may say, well, that sounds kind of fuzzy. How much bigger or how much smaller? And the answer is 25%. That hasn't always been the case. And in fact, it isn't a hard and fast rule. But there have been some cases that have tolerated a variation of 25%. So you'd have to say that the courts have empowered it to be as much as that in terms of a variance. As little variance as possible is desirable, but as much as that or more may be permissible. So what it clearly indicates is that the process of coming up with wards is the art of coming up with effective representation, not the mathematical science of mathematical perfection. And I'm not here to tell you what I think about that, but that's basically the first principle. And you'll note that I put in brackets equality of representation today, because the second task isn't just to figure out what it is today, which is sometimes a more interesting challenge than you might think. It's also to plan for future population growth tomorrow. And if you're a connoisseur of watching, the real estate markets, you'll understand that it's a little bit dodgy trying to project with absolute precision what the growth will be in 10 years. That doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means that the court recognizes that it's an exercise in estimation, and that it's not going to get cross at you if, as long as you acknowledge that, well, like here's the range of where it could go, but, there could also be a recession, or there could also be a boom in real estate that drives, the hastiest coming online of whatever's been approved. So the important point here is that under our terms of reference, we've been given the normal 10-year horizon to work through. And right now we're working with planning staff to do an assessment of what the expectation of growth is. So you can expect in our later report to see both an assessment of where the population is now, as well as where it's projected to be in 10 years. And our job is going to be to have something that doesn't just work today, but that also works over a horizon of 3 elections, because nobody wants to have to do this every 4 years. So it's to try and create something that's durable, but it's a recognition that durable may only mean 10 years because of too many things to see around the corner. So there's a third, which is the means of communication and accessibility. And what this really means is that, and sometimes I'm not convinced this is a huge factor in Grimsby, but I'm here to ask that. But there can be factors about transportation or communication patterns that really affect how wards work. And in very large municipalities, where say, on one end, they orient to Ottawa, and on the other end, they orient maybe more to Bancroft or something like that. And depending on which end of the municipality you're at, you've got a very different view about things. This one can be very important. In a place that's more condensed and compact, like Grimsby, it might be less important. But how people actually move around the community and access their municipal services is something that may well influence ward design other than mathematics if it promotes effective representation. So the court recognized that. And the fourth thing they recognized is geography. Now, obviously, Grimsby's got a big bucket of geography to deal with. You've got the lake, you've got the escarpment, but it's not just the natural stuff. it's also the human-made stuff. So the QEW is obviously a very significant fact on the ground, or you have other important roads that go up, some that cross the brow of the escarpments, some that don't. So we also have to look at geographic and topographical features that make sense. And the fifth one is really interesting. And this is either community of interest or diversity of interest. And this is the one that sort of says, okay, math is good and geography is important, but really what we're looking for is effective representation. So we have to draw wards that will allow the various communities to feel like they have either A, remained intact. And so, for example, I know that Grimsby Beach has a very distinct and unique identity. And the court would say, it really doesn't make a lot of sense to go out of your way to split up something that obviously thinks of itself as one place, just because you're drawing lines on a map. The second thing it would say, though, is make sure you don't create an impossible position for any one particular part of the municipality by watering it down too much with other voters who have a different predisposition. So oftentimes this will be a challenge with getting appropriate representation for rural areas in a place that's rapidly urbanizing. So that's another important and difficult challenge. Now what the court has said then is it's a balance of factors. You've got to consider all of them. But as one Ontario tribunal put it recently, ward design is not just a purely mathematical exercise. And so over the course of the ward boundary review, we've been told to have due respect for effective representation, which means we have to take into account all of these things. So the question that I sort of wanted to turn towards is, are any of these principles of greater importance to you in the context, like not in the abstract, but when you think of Grimsby, if you were going to say, listen, John, you got to take into account everything, but in our view, what's most important in Grimsby is blank. Does anybody have any thoughts on that, where you sit right now? Again, there's no right or wrong answer because we're allowed to take into account all of them. What I'm wondering is what you think is most important in your community. Thanks, Rob. Why don't you go ahead? And you're on mute, Rob.
Just as a thought starter, and you can argue it both sides, if we had more wards, I think we're very balanced. One, because of the size of Grimsby is very small. It's not a big sprawling place. So I think knowing it intimately, someone who lives in Ward 4 could easily represent the aspects in Ward 1 because it used to be a 3-minute drive. I think the diversity aspect of the mountain versus the lake or the beach, that is in support of let's say more wards with a specific interest, but it also goes against the aspect of the councillors having, let's say, a broader interest. So slicing that pie, I think it's going to come down to what prevails. And I don't have a particular thought other than more wards is better and allows some getting back down to number 5. Communication, I don't see as much of an issue. So really, and I think I think really the point that you made was a good one. It's not what we have today, it's what it is we're going to have in 10 or 15 years. And I think the benefit of knowing what our planning is going to be like and what we approve in terms of development, we can keep an eye on saying, well, how do we torque or adjust the ward system without making wholesale changes if all of a sudden we're putting up 22-story condos, that kind of thing. So I think we have the benefit of foresight using our official plan, knowing where this has to go. But rep by pop obviously is the prevailing thing that has to be respected.
This might be a good candidate for one where if you want to edit my sticky, we'll talk to somebody else for a minute, but you gave me a really good broad stream of consciousness answer there, and I'm not sure that I was able to guess when you started talking where you were going to end. So and we'll hear from somebody else now, but I'm happy to edit that one if you think I didn't do justice to it, Rob. Other thoughts?
John, just a quick one here. So when they're considering like future population growth and all that, are they taking into like, is it people that like, is it do they take into account like sort of like more renter? Like if an area is going to be more populated with people, but they're going to be, let's say, more transient people, so renter type of people that are only going to be here on short-term basis versus people that are moving into the area to live here on a long-term basis. Is that sort of considered in the population, or is it?
No, absolutely. So the idea is they take a look at all the different applications for different land use permissions, and there's different rules of thumb about expected people per unit in different types of dwellings. So for a rental, it might be 1.7 people per unit, you assume that if it's a successful building, people may come and may go in the sense of being transient, like you were saying, but they'll still tend to be full. For larger single-family dwellings, your estimate might be 2.3 people or higher. So the planning profession has gotten pretty good at estimating this sort of thing. The biggest challenges relate to the pace at which it comes onto the market. Other comments? Is it hard to get your heads around this one because the court said it's about a balance, and so I'm asking you what's most important and you're all thinking it's a balance? Or is that not where your heads are at? Or does anybody think that yeah, like what part of it's a balance do you not understand, John, because the court said it was a balance?
I think your comment you've made a couple of times here is very applicable. There is no right or wrong answer, right? We are trying to achieve a balance. I think a lot of people in Grimsby are nervous about the speed of growth and where the growth is happening. So we have a lot of concentration in the west end of the town. There's been some infrastructure put in place. There's going to be a GO station. There's going to be large apartment buildings. We have Grimsby on the lake. We have high rises going in along the Queenie. And now I'm reading today that we're talking about 215 units out by the new hospital in an area that's already a nightmare to drive on at 5 o'clock at night or on a weekend. And so when you look at the future growth, if today is any indication of the future, we're headed for trouble. And I'm concerned as I'll be upfront. I live in Grimsby Beach, so I'm participating in the Grimsby Beach study. So obviously we're interested in heritage here, right? And we hear a lot of heritage discussions in Grimsby. There's a lot of heritage in Grimsby. It's a 30,000 population. We better be careful. We could back ourselves into a corner, and having the mountain in the middle of all this really adds to it. So I think we are trying to achieve a balance. The growth concerns me quite a bit personally.
Other thoughts? I'm going to plow ahead because you get to apply these considerations in what we're talking about next. This last bit before the last questions is just about the current ward populations. And I'm going to just show you so this chart, and you see that it says the word estimates. The gold standard of censuses in Canada is the Canadian census. And, it's just our luck that we decided to do this in 2021 because they're going to be in the field redoing the new census. And so we're all sort of stuck with 2016 data. And so what you see in this chart reflects the 2016 data, plus we've added in data from Grimsby's water metering that reflects new connections. And that gets you up to an updated set of estimates that puts it right now around 30,335. And we've been working on this in real time over the course of this. And so these estimates might tweak a little bit between now and the end, but that's simply as it should be, because your planning staff weren't sitting on a interim census in the fall of 2020 just in case they needed one. I mean, it's something that you do when you do it. So the first task that we were given once we were retained was, okay, how about you bring it up from 2016 up a little bit further? They're trying to get us some further 2020 data now. So these numbers may change a bit, but not by very much, because between 2016 and 2019, it went up about 3,000. So that would be like 3% one way or the other if you had similar growth in 2020. So it's not a bad estimate. As we've said here, it certainly gives us a good starting point for our analysis. And what you see here is that if you're working from a population of 30,335 as our best estimate at the moment, you got one line for each of the wards, you got 2 councillors per ward. If you divide that by 4, you've got an average of 7,584, and your variance from your averages is set out here as a percentage, and here it is as a number. And I have provided, and these are available on the web as well, a slide for each of the various wards. But I think in the interest of time, rather than yakking that at you, I'd just like to kind of go directly to the question. And there's 3 questions here. What do you think? Are you satisfied with the existing wards? And maybe what I can do is I'll ask the first question, as overall, just generally, and then, maybe we can sort of organize it so we'll focus on, go 1, 2, 3, 4 or something, just to be a little bit orderly, because order is good. But any general comments on the existing wards, and not stuff that's repetitive of your general instruction to me earlier, just general observations about, the puzzle piece shape of 2 or, the size of one or the other. Any just general comments to start off with? Mr. McNeil. Oh, you're on mute, sir.
Okay. Again, it's the value of the representation that you have that's particularly important. And we can see that 1/3 of the population resides in Ward 4, and that's only likely to increase. And yet, if you look at the balance of the town, there are a lot more facilities within those other wards than there are within Ward 4. For example, there's no library in Ward 4. There is no fire hall in Ward 4. There are a whole raft of things that people would consider value for money when they pay their taxes, and that they're not receiving right now. And so again, if you expect that you are going to have any influence on it, then you ought to have a good representation within council. And my guess is that it has to take into account population, and that it has to balance out with the rest of the town, because the rest of the town can say, yeah, but we can't really afford that now. But we've gone without a library, and again, that's just an example, or without a fire hall to have meaningful fire service within a set amount of time. Those are important things, and we need to be able to provide those things for members of our community, because if we don't look after people that aren't in our ward, then our community is going to fall apart.
Okay. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Mr. McNeil. Rob?
Maybe the question is, are we satisfied with existing wards? I don't think anyone in the town can say they've ever had an issue talking to any of their councillors or even councillors outside their thing. In a lot of ways, what is the ward system about, and is it about certain specific things you're trying to protect? In some ways, that says more councillors should be, council at large, since everyone would be sensitive to the issue, but I don't think that's efficient. Maybe the question might be, how do we build, or how do we improve upon the wards that we have? And given that if we go from 30 to 40,000 people in another few years, that with 4 wards, would that be sufficient? Again, look forward, look over the next hill, and that'll be, 4 wards for 40,000 people. That might be, this might support the idea of going to 6 wards. How would you parse that out? Again, I'm fairly ambivalent about it, because I think you can debate it many ways. Saying we'll have you divide it kind of by the QEW, you split that up you know, between two wards, you have the mountain and so forth. There are a number of different ways to parse that out. And I think through good communication discussion, we can figure it out. But really, when you look at it, for me, it's going to be the growth. And if we're going to be at 40,000 people, you know, in another decade or so, I think this is why we should entrench more wards now if we were to use the ward system and go from there. Again, the overall defining characteristic of Grimsby is very compact. It's 50 Road to Bartlett Road, you know, and it's a QE up to Grassy. It's a very contained kind of thing. So we'll know which way it's going to go. It's going to be how many people is sufficient to get good representation for.
Other thoughts on how it's working now? And as you can see, I'm just going to show you some of the other questions to maybe take the handcuffs off a bit. Not surprisingly, given the effective representation test, I'm interested in any geographic features that you think are really appropriate to use as ward boundaries. I'm also interested in whether there was anything about how you move around Grimsby that might influence the shape of wards, but so I'm happy to take comments on any of them, and I can bounce around between the slides. Any takers? Ruth.
Hi, Ruth Moffat. So when I completed the survey earlier, it gave me, you know, pause to consider, you know, the way the wards are split up now, and to Rob's point, you know, how we could more equitably change the boundaries perhaps of the wards. I think a couple of things have to be taken into consideration when we make up the ward boundaries, and that is the area, the size of the area geographically, and also the population. To Stacy's point, you know, I feel comfortable speaking with any of our counselors, no matter which ward they are in. And if I have a concern about anything, really, if I happen to see them, I have no issue, you know, approaching them if they happen to be handy. And I think that Grimsby geographically is contained enough by the existing boundaries at the east and west, south and north ends that there shouldn't be any animosity amongst the residents from each ward, to the end that, well, you have a library and we don't, or because it's not that far from one end of town to the other. The way it is now. If anything, it would be the people that live up on the mountain that maybe would have concerns about, you know, the distance that they have to commute to. But these things, you know, libraries and services, you know, they change as well with the population. So we're going to see a big development around the GO train station, you know, in the future. And I think that there's going to be a great deal of population growth out in Ward 4. So 2 counselors per ward, I think it's okay, but perhaps we should consider increasing the number of wards, possibly. I'm not for more government, having said that, but I think that the counselors that we have now might agree that maybe there's too many people in certain wards, that it's difficult for them to manage. We haven't heard from any of the counselors that are on here tonight. Maybe we should hear from them.
Well, you know
Thanks.
what, thanks for your comments. They very graciously yielded the floor because they're going to get a couple of council meetings to get to talk about this. And so we really wanted to hear from members of the public tonight, but it's not because you counselors probably aren't itching to say something. They just yielded the floor to make sure you had time. So I think we'll keep going that way because there's lots more to hear from the members of the public who were good enough to participate tonight. A sort of a sub question that I have is, like, obviously the escarpment is a hugely important geographic fact in the way in which people live their lives and the way in which the communities orient themselves. I just had a question for you. If you live near the Ridge Road, do you feel any kind of kinship with the people just on the south side, or sorry, on the bottom side of the escarpment, or is it like a totally different world? Is it like, do you have more in common because you all have to deal with the Niagara Escarpment Commission and all the issues of the escarpment? You all love it and you all care about it. So that, like, if we had a ward that was, should the escarpment be a barrier between two things, or in fact, should I be thinking of it as being a unifying thing between the top and the bottom? What's the role of that geography? Dave, you got a comment, and then Veronica.
Yeah, hi folks. This kind of goes along kind of a mulling that I've had for a little while, and a question I was going to ask. Maybe I haven't been here long enough yet, but do we have, as a town, do we have any succinct planning studies as to how much population growth up top, in other words, towards Grassy, the southern end of the town boundary, can actually sustain? In other words, of that 40 or maybe going towards 50,000 ultimate population, is 5 of that slotted for up there? Is 10 of that planned for up there? Hopefully we're not going to pour that many people into the what we know as the downtown Little Grimsby, and or even Grimsby up by the lake with the new towers that are planned and everything else. I was just wondering, maybe I've missed maybe I haven't been here long enough to research the planning. I'm a planner by profession myself, but maybe I haven't been here long enough to research exactly what's planned for up there yet in the areas that are not agriculturally sensitive and designated as such.
Well, look, I'll just give you a quick answer to the question, because there's going to be a lot more on this in subsequent reports. But frankly, it's we're just sort of doing one step at a time. The quick answer is yes. Between the region and the town, there's all the sorts of planning that you'd expect. There's, as you mentioned, there's agricultural constraints up there. There's also servicing constraints. And yes, I think within the overall growth forecasts, there's a pretty reasonable idea about what's planned up there. But you'd be better off. I am not a planner, and I don't want to be arrested by your governing body for drifting into speaking on behalf of the town planners on this. But I do know that there's some pretty decent forecasts, but I'm not in a position to talk about them right now.
Thanks.
Veronica, did you have a?
Yeah, mine was more of a question when you were kind of asking about the locations. I was kind of thinking as far as, so myself, I'm in Ward 3, and just looking at the map, it's all lake, right? Where I question almost if the ward should be split up, where you have representation lake by the lake, but also extending towards the escarpment as well, so that we have the protection all around the town. Right? So I don't know. I think as far as when council gets together, they're all discussing, all different wards anyway. So it's not like, one ward is kind of at battle with another ward kind of thing. So I don't know. These are just kind of questions that are kind of going through my head right now. But yeah, but it would be nice if everybody kind of had, lake and escarpment and all in the middle, right? So just a thought.
I just want to see if you mean if the wards were sort of oriented this way.
Correct.
Like layers in a cake, so that everybody.
Basically, if Ward 4 were cut in half north to south, and Ward 2 were cut in half north to south, in a way.
Now, would that do? So guess what principle we're going to bump into next? It'd be number 5. It would be communities of interest and not splitting them up callously. So, like if we did something over here and split 2 in half, it looks like we wouldn't have to do any great violence to the integrity of Grimsby Beach, because I'm very mindful of the important heritage aspects there. If you only had 4, now if you had a larger number going this way, you probably would start cutting things up. But of course, this is just playing with a rectangle on a map, right? I mean, you don't have to be so mechanistic as that. But what do you think? Are we going to start doing too much damage by making them too long and skinny if we do that? Or will we do benefit by linking the lake to the highlands areas? And Ruth, I think you're next, and then Rob.
You know, I think that that's part of the wonderful thing about engagements like this, is to hear ideas that are so totally out of the box that you sit back and you think, yeah, right. Why didn't I think of that? We become so entrenched in what we have, and we've lived with it for so many years. We can't see it any other way. And I think Veronica's idea to incorporate the wards geographically, like you've shown here, is a fantastic idea, because it truly does bring in, you know, a piece of the mountain, a piece of the escarpment, and a piece of the lake, all into one geographic area. I think it's a great idea.
Okay, thanks. I think Rob, you're next.
Yeah, so I just want to build on what Ruth and Veronica have said. And I think in general, again, because the town is very compact, lake to grassy, you can cover that off in 15 minutes. So imagine if you would, John, to, you know, put the little square boxes from one side to the other. I think what that does is that forces the councillor representative to have a sensitivity to all the issues. And let me give you an example that just came up probably in the last 6 months, where, you know, there was a discussion around the air guns and all that other stuff. And council made some very good, you know, said, hey, we have to have safe areas and all these other things. But out of the equation, as I watched it, we forgot all about the aspects of the, you know, the farm community and the need for guns for varmint control and other things like that. And, you know, in essence, the council voted on one thing only to walk it back a little bit later when they said, well, there's some other things we have to do. So I think having slices of from lake to escarpment gives everybody all the sensitivity, and it better educates our representatives. So when they're trying to come together on a collective issue. And, you know, that's the benefit, I think, you know, that I enjoy in Ward 2. My two good councillors, you know, they got a little chunk of the escarpment, they got a little chunk downtown, they got a little chunk here, and they have very broad-minded opinions. But, you know, at least they are not, let's say, narrowly representing only one point of view. And I think that's important when we're doing what we're doing. So yeah, keep going for another 2 wards. And John, I think you have the solution for tonight.
So can I ask you another question? Just not because I didn't hear the comments that were just made, but just because I'm sort of, I really am strongly in agreement with what I think Ruth said a minute ago, which is it's fun hearing different ideas. So, you know, another thing that I think we've heard through some of the surveys is rather trying to sort of orient one that's kind of all this way, and, you know, say all the way to Ridge or something that runs basically this way, and then some number that's oriented, and you know what, like it could be that this one goes deeper into deeper down the hill to take into account the fact that there's going to be quite a population density here, and then the other ones would sort of be sort of skinny lake-based ones, and then sort of stuff that's fatter, you know, from the highlands down the escarpment, you know, so go far enough until you can actually get yourself to where you need to have the right kind of population. Is that a crazy idea? Because it puts the wrong sort of representation together. I'm just curious to what you're thinking, because, you know, we've tried it this way.
So if you're asking me the question, I think what happens, just because of the design of our town, you end up with narrow interests and you don't have broad interests. And remember, we got to remember we have 9 people sitting around a table trying to come to consensus. And I think the broader appreciation for the town on certain issues, the better off they can. And you know, I kind of like, for me, this idea that Ruth and Veronica put forward of having broad representation. You know, as you go across from Ward 4 all the way down to Ward 1, if everyone had a chunk of the mountain, a little bit of chunk of downtown, a little chunk of the lake, I mean, then you have counselors who are fully engaged on the issues. They're close enough, they know it well. So when they're meeting around the council table, they can have a very good and hearty discussion.
Now, look, I'm just looking at the clock.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Broad is much better. You don't want to be pitting. You don't want to be pitting one area against another in different interest groups.
Okay. I'm just looking at the clock, and we'd sort of promised to try and hold this to an hour and a half. I am not paid by the hour, and I am more than happy to keep going until people run out of stuff to say. And honestly, the only reason we're not done yet is because you've had so much to say, which honestly is the best thing possible from my point of view. So we can keep going, but if anybody does have to leave, I just want to make it crystal clear. You can communicate to us just as directly through the online survey. So, but let's just keep going for a few more minutes until because I really only have one last question, plus any other feedback you want to give me on this sort of overarching geographic question I've been asking. So, other comments?
John, just a quick with the sort of the north-south wards they've been talking about, the lake to the escarpment and all that. Like how, because I think that's a great idea too. I like the sort of incorporation of everything north to south that way. Like how long, like what would it take to sort of redraw the boundaries? Like would you need more public consultation to do that? Because that seems like quite a wholesale change to undertake. You know, just in this process.
Well, no, that's exactly what our job to do is. So we're good for, if you can imagine it, we're good for modeling it and within the time permitted. So basically you'll see that we didn't bring any drafts for change because right now we're just gathering ideas, but it's absolutely an expectation on us that we'll go to council, get some sort of broad direction, come up with some models, some ideas, and then the second round of consultation will be about those models. And by that point, there'll be an expectation on us that they reflect the current and future population and that we're able to report on, you know, this would work if you did it this way. You know, I suppose no one's going to be really surprised if I tell you that it's way easier to draw 4 rectangles than it is to get them balanced on a population basis. But that's what the job is. Other comments? So look, I've got a question here, and I kind of love this question because it sort of captures everything. And you'll recognize it from the survey, so I apologize if you've already answered it. But you might think about it differently after having had the benefit of listening to your colleagues from different parts of the community. So there's many possible and legitimate ways to draw ward boundaries. Of these different possibilities, it's interesting that I feel like we've heard almost all of them represented in one way or another. No change for the sake of change. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. We've certainly heard that expressed. Ensure that each vote is weighted as equally as possible, so get the math right. Respect established communities. Don't be splitting up Grimsby Beach. I'm not sure I heard too much about reflecting transportation and service patterns, because I think it's an important factor, but I think as you've all said, Grimsby is a relatively compact place and you can get from one end to the other relatively conveniently compared to many municipalities in Ontario. So it could be that this one is an important factor, but not so important to you. Be easy to understand. We haven't talked about it, but there's all sorts of funny little nooks and crannies where you, I think I've heard commentary from people who are close to the situation that, you know, people who live right around here or, you know, or on the fringes of some of these areas may not understand why they're in Ward 1 or Ward 2. So there's being easy to understand and understandable for the people who live there. Continue to deliver rural representation. Don't cook it up in a way that keeps that from happening. Or encourage a Grimsby-wide view or a broad view. If you were to say, urge us to consider any of these particular factors or any other that aren't here that you think we forgot, like honestly, we were just trying to not have 25 different options to make it so you could hold them all in your head. So we didn't deliberately intend to exclude anything. We just we thought at some point you got to draw the line. Any advice for us on, based on everything you've heard, what you think is most important?
I think the Grimsby wide view that sort of reflected in Veronica's sort of idea with the wards. That's the way I didn't pick that in the survey earlier, but that's the way I would sort of lean on this now.
Cool. Other comments? Oh, no, sorry, that was Rob. Anybody else got your hand up?
Yeah, I second that. I think, as we're going through this, I like the fact that my counselors would have to have a broad view and not just a narrow perspective representing one community, which can, they could get easily outvoted. And I think the broader the area that needs to be covered, I think the better it is for, representation and democracy.
Who's next? Ruth, you're next.
Yeah, I agree. I think Veronica's idea was brilliant. And to point one, be adjusted, not redrawn. I think we do have to redraw the boundaries to adequately reflect what makes up the town of Grimsby. And that is most definitely, a little bit of the mountain, a little bit of the escarpment, and a little bit of the lakefront on both sides of the QEW and both sides of the Niagara escarpment.
Who's next? Mark.
Yeah, so here's an interesting approach. If we look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, we will achieve number 7, won't we? So and I'm not trying to be trite about this, but I think we agree something needs to change. This isn't working, so be adjusted and not redrawn. We're not changing. We're not looking at this for the sake of change. We know that this isn't 1970 anymore. Grimsby is still a small town, but it's growing fast. And if we try and distribute our population, be respectful of heritage areas. It isn't just about Grimsby Beach. We're going through this on Main Street right now. And we know we have some traffic issues downtown, and we know we have some traffic issues in the West End. That's the way it is. Try and get on the Queenie on the weekend. I mean, Grimsby residents do not go on the Queenie in the weekends, right, in the summer, because we know it's a parking lot. And being easy to understand, that could be a little more challenging because folks may not understand. But I think you're going to put a straw dog together and give a couple of presentations and say, hey, look this is what our consulted group here that we consulted came up with. Do you agree? And some people will agree and some people won't. And of course, we do have a rural representation we have to keep in mind because we're going to run out of room down here. Is that where we're going next? Up there? If we do that, we'll get to number 7. We will truly end up with a Grimsby wide view. That's an interesting way to look at it.
Well, for some of you, there's a place on the Supreme Court of Canada. For others, you may get a job as a facilitator if you keep on making summation comments like that, Mark. But what I was going to say is, am I putting this in the right place? That this is the outcome you're looking for, and you do it by a variety of things? Because I don't want to put your little yellow box in the wrong place.
It works for me. That's just my view, and I like the fact that we had some really out of the box ideas. Good. There's no wrong answer. Good. Throw it out there. This was a good session.
Thank you. Who's next? Is Ruth?
Yeah, I would love to hear from Dorothy Wood and Stacy as to how they might see this as a possible solution. And the other thing I think that we have to remember is that there's basically 8 citizens here that have joined this Grimsby Talk conference. Out of a population of I'm not sure how many voters there are in the town of Grimsby, but, you know, I think that also has to be considered. We're only 8 people here tonight.
Absolutely, and this is why the consultation's ongoing and why, you know, it's terrific that you all were able to make it tonight, and we hope people will be able to make it the next time. The great thing about a number of this size is that it leads to a really rich conversation, but it all has to be validated through larger participation in, you know, that's quantitative research as opposed to just, you know, they call this qualitative, where we listen to the opinions of individuals. Quantitative is where you try and validate them across a larger base. So you couldn't be more right about that. Did you have, just before I let you go though, did you have a priority here is it the Grimsby Wide View one that you're most keen on, or are there other aspects of it? Or did you like you do all of these things and you'll get to hear anyway kind of approach?
Are you asking me?
Oh yeah, yeah. You don't get to get away without.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I agree with the previous person, Mark.
Okay.
If we do all of these things, we'll get to the Grimsby Wide View and include all of the neighborhoods above and below the escarpment. I think that's really important for a community.
Right.
Everybody should be considered.
Sorry, who's next? I'm testing how well I can type while trying to watch who's, there you go, Mr. McNeil.
Just looking at it right now, 6 seems to be better than 4 in that you definitely, if you're drawing it north and south, you are going to get a wide variety of perspectives. The other side of it is that I don't believe that there's a huge appetite for more politicians. So again, the thought that we're going to have a representation of 2, while it sounds nice, and again, while it really doesn't cost us all that much more on the tax base, if we were to do it, then it seems like a reasonable thing to talk about. But again, I would caution that people really need to talk about it after the next election, because I think this could be a rather profound election issue. I think that for the time being that we stick with what we've got until the next election, and then say, listen, we have a responsibility to do it, and we have a responsibility for to you, the community at large, to do it well. We want all your input. Again, we got a whole bunch of people thinking out of the box here, but how many more who have not sat in on this meeting might have had even more brilliant ideas as well, and we could have a fulsome discussion with everybody in the community saying what their preference is. I think that's a pretty valuable thing. I love the idea of bringing this up. I definitely think that we need to have adequate representation according to our population, and redrawing the boundaries and making it bigger and all the rest of that is a worthwhile process. But I think that we need to have true community involvement, and I think that until we have an election, until we actually ask folks if that's what they want in their community, that right now we're 8 people making decisions for the community at large, and no matter how noble we think we are, we're not dictators. And
you know, just to,
and again, don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying, it's like there isn't sufficient representation amongst us 8. We were not elected. We're not even the council of Grimsby.
Well, I just want to be fair to your participants. Nobody here is saying this is anything other than a collection of opinion, because the people who will make the decision are council. So as facilitator, I think the honor of your co-participants, it's no one is saying that they're decision makers. It's just idea sharers tonight. So I don't think that's something that anybody should walk away from here feeling like they've in any way usurp the process. There'll be lots more process.
Oh, please don't misunderstand me, Mr. Matheson. I have the utmost respect for the people who have participated tonight. I think it's a great and it's a noble thing to participate in how your community moves forward. There is absolutely no question of that at all.
Well
But
said.
what I'm saying is that if this was a great opportunity, there are even better opportunities once the community is apprised of what needs to be done for getting bigger and better and wider participation. Again, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that the group tonight is going to have an undue influence over everything that's going to happen from this point forward. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is that an election is a perfect time for people to express their opinions about their community. And if they are given a bunch of options, then they may be able to come to a wise choice after that election.
So would I be best capturing your thinking as true community involvement's necessary prior to change? But in regard to the change that you might be interested in, do you have a favorite principle of these, or is there one that's more important?
As I stated right from the start, I think that people need to be represented fairly. And right now, redrawing boundaries and stuff like that is only through the change in demographics and in change in the number of households. And that's worthwhile doing for the next election, absolutely. But then tell people this is the last time we're doing it this way. And what we need to do is find what's best for our community and make that an election issue and get people to work on that during the election. It's a perfect time to do that.
Any other thoughts? Rob, I see your hand up again.
Yeah, I have a little bit of a counterpoint to where Stacy is on this. I think this council and I think it was Councillor Cadwell and Vane who brought forward this motion to do the review is the thing. There's going to be a time it takes to do this process. If we can get it done for the next election, good. I think it brings up the point that has to be in terms of making an effective council. We may have to look at plebiscites or certain things that can be looked at ahead of time. I think the fact that only 8 people showed up tonight suggests that how big a burning topic this is with the electorate. And but if we don't get it done in time for the next election, so be it. But we do have 2 years, and it used to be that council was only in office for 2 years before they had elections. That was only like 20, 30 years ago. So, I appreciate where Stacy was coming from the standpoint of well, let's bring it as a broad topic. But I do recall in several of the ward debates, it was brought up about the evolution of Grimsby and how is it going to get represented. For me, the burning issue is we have a huge mismatch between Ward 3 and Ward 4 as an example. And, I mean, not that may change things, but, we do have an opportunity to address a mismatch that is outstanding. 1 and 2 seem to be, fairly balanced. So it's going to take what's going to take. I think we have the opportunity to derive the options, opinions, and views of the people. But, we got 2 years before we're going to cast ballots.
Other thoughts? Mr. Rawlinson.
Yeah, John, and all, in that we have 1.5 to 2 years prior to the next election, would it not be possible to conduct a bunch of, call it what you will, public forums or even a referendum, electronic or otherwise, to gauge the populace and their feeling about this, so that we go into the next election with the new boundaries and or new wards set? If we got 18, 19, 20 months, why not?
So, one of the best scenes in the Jurassic Park was when he looks in the mirror and it says, things in mirror are closer than they appear. And so too is really the deadline for completing this process. So just a bit of background, you'd see this in the underlying staff reports that were before council when they decided to go ahead. As a practical matter, under the Municipal Act, any bylaw to give effect to this has to be basically in effect for January the 1st of the year in which the election starts. So we're in 2021 now. A bylaw has to be fully approved and to have withstood any appeals that might come out of this process in order to be effective for the election of 2022. So as a practical matter, is you just do the work back if we had like a detailed work plan. It's considered best practice to give a clear 6 months from the time council concludes its consideration of the matter, because it's any citizen's right to file an appeal if they don't like the outcome of council's decision. And that can easily take about 6 months, as on an expedited process to be resolved. So as a practical matter, you do have 2 years before the election, but you don't have 2 years for decision making about this. And that's what the time frame this is on is to June. And that's not council's fault. That's because of the provincial rules under the Municipal Act that pretty much mean this has to be done by June.
Right, but likely enough time to get a referendum question on said election ballot though too, if we wanted.
So what you could do, I suppose, I haven't directed my mind to this, so don't quote me if I'm wrong, but yeah, if you wanted to keep the same boundaries in place for that election, but have a referendum about whether or not you wanted to give effect to them in 2026, you could do that. But the problem is you'd be 5 years into a 10-year shelf life by that point. And so, because the shelf life of one of these things is typically only about 10 years because of the kind of twisting that comes about in the representation because of uneven patterns of growth. And as many of you have already identified, Ward 4 is going to be the challenging one. So,
right.
So you could do that, but it wouldn't be without its own problem. But it's a good point you raise. That would be an option that would be before council.
All we know is growth is coming. We all see it already with people coming around the lake, whether it be due to COVID or otherwise, the mass exodus from the GTHA or the GTA. And we see the moving trucks coming down the highway every day, right? And it's, who knows how fast that growth will go, how fast it will come as a result of what we're going through right now.
True. Mark, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I have to step out. I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity, I think, and to the council actually as well, and to our folks at Town Hall, to at least have the bravery to come out here and ask us for our opinion. I realize there's only 8 of us, but next round there would probably be more, because I was even talking to people today while I was shoveling snow, and people are interested in this. And so I hope that people take the time to join and give their opinion. It's just an opinion. But we're here, and the fact is you asked for it, and you're listening to what we have to say, and to me that's a good thing. That's working our way back down to the bottom again, right? The Grimsby YDU. So thank you very much to the town council for having the nerve to do this, and John, you did a good job as a facilitator. It's a shitty job, I know, I've done it many times trying to watch what's going on and keep things moving, so kudos to you as well.
I got to say, it wasn't a bad job at all with you guys tonight. Like, this is great input, and I'll just say that once, because you probably all want to get on back to your families and that. But it was a terrific participation, and I really must thank you. Any final words? We should probably try and wind this up in the next 4 minutes, because then at least we'd only be half an hour over. Rob? Rob, you might be muted.
Sorry, rapid fire stuff. And I don't know if it's outside the scope. I think there have been a few things that, if we're trying to improve representation and engagement of the public, if that's the overall exercise of having a a municipal democracy, I think we need to look at a few gaps. We have a communication gap or an awareness gap between the region and the municipality. I think we have very good, Mayor Jordan brought in, Zoom and so forth, and that was a big benefit for communicating. But, we have a poor regional councillor here who, gets tagged on to the 2 a.m. viewing of giving his piece. And I think we, as a resident, we have to get that communication better as part of it, and hence the reason the deputy mayor as a regional rep might be of you. I think we also, if we're looking at governance, we have to look at the potential as raised earlier on an issue I think Stacy brought up. Maybe we do this by plebiscite. I think we need to look at that as an element of governance, and if there's a super majority on a plebiscite that the public speaks first versus maybe what a decision of council is. I think we have to study these ideas of governance. And I'm not saying I'm in favor for it, just study it. We're starting off. I think our councillors are undervalued in terms of the remuneration and what they have to do. We can say, well, it's $100,000 and that's a lot of money. When we look at the total budget, it's not a rounding error. And I think that, if we're going to engage people, and as this job becomes more and more full-time, we may have to look at upping that, and I'm in favor of that. I think we have to do it. I think the view on the fire department is one that kind of goes under the radar. Nobody really understands it in terms of governance. And one of the other things I would encourage or think of, and it's like any job we undertake, I think both before and during, I think we need to encourage those who are interested and those who get elected that there's ongoing training on governance, corporate governance. I mean, you get a directorship for it, and that takes time. And that's why corporations are as governed as well as they are. I think we need to offer that to our councillors to make them better if they so wish. The other one I think for me really is, the biggest flaw that we have really is around, we are not taking advantage of the 30,000 people that live in this town and their education and knowledge and care and concern. We see it, at how we rallied around a hospital since 1995. And, I deem our hospital as a Rocky. We've been on the mat every round, but we get up and fight. And that's the spirit of this community. And I think we need to engage more of our people and find ways to do it, to get their expertise and passion, to get the best outcomes for the town, to help our councillors make the best decisions. So that's kind of my big list, and I don't know if it's outside the scope of it, but I'm sure a few of them are councillors, but I do want to thank council and the mayor for undertaking this, because it is a necessary exercise to improve upon local democracy.
Thank you. And your comments are all very well taken, because I promised I'd leave space at the end for anything that you wanted to say that you hadn't managed to say yet. Anybody else got any last words as we hit 7:30? Well, seeing none, Madam Clerk, I think that we can declare this a very productive session, and I can turn it back over to you for any closing procedures that may be required to ensure that all is done properly. I'll just stop sharing my screen, but I'm just going to say again, thank you for all your participation, and also the active participation of council by staying here and listening in. It's really appreciated, both that you're here to hear, but also that you gave the space to the members of the public to be able to have a safe zone to communicate. So that's the very best it can be in the way that all worked out. So thank you for that.
Thank you, John. I think it was a very good start to all our public engagement. The next one being February 4th. We also have the survey on letstalkgrimsby.ca ongoing. So if the mayor wants to say a quick closing remark.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Just thank you very much, John, and thank you to every citizen that came out. We would have loved more, but I'm just really happy that you all took the time to actually make your comments heard, and that you are engaged in our little town, right? So it is really important that that people who have their say it in formats like this, and maybe some of you will say it in 2 years down the road when we have the next election. So anyway, thank you very much. And again, we have the next meeting on February 4th, and council will be discussing this on February 16th. So thank you very much and have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone.